Liftoff. Great to be back, Jeff and Alexander. We are now doing the 7th episode of a 6-episode series, the final one.
Always put that extra work in.
We're just covering one chapter here, but it's a hugely important and interesting chapter that we're going to look at. It's chapter 21 of GA2 of this book. But I think it's actually useful if we remind ourselves of where we left off last time, because for me, there's a really strong connection. So I'm just going to read 2 short paragraphs from that and then try to make this connection to the art aspect that we're going to be talking about as the basis of this chat. So this is something we looked at last time. We have seen that man is the central point of the world order. As spirit, he attains to the highest form of existence, and in thought, he achieves the most highly perfected world process. Things really are only as they are illuminated by him. This is really interesting because it is putting this emphasis that we've seen throughout this work on it's our spiritual activity that adds to the percept. Okay, the percept is a mute world. It's a completely mute world from a spirit point of view until we bring the thinking activity to it, and it's that activity in us that's like we link it to the world, and it helps us to make sense of the world. But the second part of that sentence is sort of like really, really interesting. Things really are only as they are illuminated by him. So it's painting this idea, painting this picture that if I was looking for a picture to describe it, I would say something along these lines, that if, imagine I just had a yellow lamp and I illuminated the world with that yellow lamp, then I would see all things yellow. I would see things through that perspective. And if I had a red lamp and I shone that on, so like whatever it is I'm observing, then everything would be so like a shade of red, and so on with all of these different colors. So in this like somewhat dramatic sentence, he's again pointing to this idea that's like it's a consciousness of which perspective, what color our thinking is, or which worldview, you could say also we're working out of, will determine how we see reality, or what is real. So we can begin to ask ourselves the question, okay, so you've got this color and this color and this color, but how do we synthesize them? And he's relating this to pessimism and optimism. So I'll read the second paragraph that I wanted to read in connection with this. Pleasure and displeasure are present for a human being in the higher sense only in so far as he is himself only insofar as he himself experiences these as such. Hence, all optimism and pessimism fall to the ground. The former assumes that the world is of such a character that everything in it is good, that it leads man to its highest happiness. But if this is to be true, he himself must first win from the objects of the world something for which he longs. That is, he cannot be happy by means of the world, but only through himself. And what I'm seeing here is we're going to talk about the role of the artist, but we're already in this chapter 20. We're getting this clear indication that there's an artistry to life itself as well, that because we are responsible for what spirit we bring to phenomena, that it divests us of this idea that there is one way of interpreting a certain event, be it good, be it bad. And elsewhere in that paragraph, he'll hint at this idea that there is neither good nor bad until the individual spirit makes it so. So, with that as an introduction, let's look at the very first sentence of chapter 21, which is what we're going to talk about, because I think this idea is really reinforced here. Okay. Our theory of knowledge has rid cognition of the merely passive character often associated with it, and has conceived it as an activity of the human spirit. It is generally supposed that the content of knowledge is received from without. Indeed, it is supposed that we preserve the objectivity of knowledge in proportion as we refrain from adding anything of our own to the material taken hold of. So my question is, Jeff and Alexander, what do you make of this bit? Our theory of knowledge has rid cognition of the merely passive character often associated with it, and has conceived it as an activity of the human spirit. Activity, our cognition, our knowing is not passive, it's an activity. What do you guys make of that? Or if you want to, you can talk about something else in that chapter.
Well, that's profound question for this whole series that we've been working with, and also Steiner's anthroposophy, of course. Because it tells us what place we have in the world, in creation, and our responsibility. So it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how it's interesting how this artistic ability comes in this chapter, because the artist, and he will go into this a little bit, the artist recreates the world through his spirit into his own image, but still an image that is recognizable.
Mm-hmm.
And that points to something deeper into the world. Which a scientist also does, of course. Yeah, so that's not a difference. But it's it's just broadening the ways in which we can reach depth. Science, art. So just different paths that we can hopefully integrate. And I think to discover that activity of the spirit is an act of freedom. And it's our act of freedom as well. It's not only an act of freedom to discover it. It is the human act of freedom is present in that activity.
Can I ask a leading question there?
Yeah.
How does the word participation fit into what you're describing there, Alexander?
Yeah, of course. That's what leads to participation and relationship. Otherwise, if we're passive, we're separated from the world. Yeah. In a way. well, if we're passive, if we see ourselves as passive, then there's something about us that becomes muted. Something about us that we don't recognize. And we'll, even if we're not objectively separated, subjectively we will feel separated. And we will tend to act in separation or from that truth. Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's deeply tied with participation.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, would you like to add something there, or shall I? I've got something on the burner.
I have a question. I want a question, and then I want to maybe refer to a comment that you made, Angus. And for Alexander, the question is, what do you mean exactly that the artist creates in his own image or her own image? That sounds very biblical as relates to God creating.
Oh, that's where
in
I
his
got
own
it from.
image. Yeah. So you're okay, Fichte. You're a god. You're the god. You're all I, except for the dude that threw a rock through your window and the not I, as Goethe criticized Fichte for. So yes, there's that question.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Because it's not in this chapter.
Yeah.
He doesn't say that is the case. And then I want to refer to this idea of the muted self. I'm not sure it's perfectly connected, but I'm struck by Angus using the term as relates to the spiritual world remains muted until we enter the scene and infuse our perception with thinking. To me, that suggests that this whole sentence suggests, this whole chapter suggests, and a summary as a summary of the whole work suggests that we've established a continuum with nature and a differentiation as artists, right? And then I'll just add another picture, which is the scientist doesn't do the same thing as the artist does, as I think you mentioned, Alexander, except as an inversion. Right. And so here he says, you make the perception disappear in the essence of the generative essence that brings about the perception is what you're participating in. And with the artist, you start with the whole, almost the essence, and you produce something in the material world that is, when it's art, it's living and transparent for one who engages in that art. That's the way to put it. Relationally engages with that art, back to the creator. And in that sense, I can see that it is the image of the creator, but not a temporal image. It's an image of the creator as a creator in the continuum of existence, something like that. This is a good introduction here, isn't it? To what we're doing.
Can I add a little bit of flesh to Fichte and to Schelling as part of this conversation? Things you brought in, the I and the not I. And one of the things, if you like, one way of understanding, one way of critiquing Fichte is that whilst he recognizes the integrity, the sacredness of the I as the source of absolute being, and occasionally he does refer to it as the absolute I. Schelling will criticize him or critique him for saying this is too rooted in the subjective. That this isn't an act that leads us out actually into the world and sort of like helps us to overcome this subject object experience that we have of nature. And this is a long story which I'm going to abbreviate quite drastically, but really recommend if something interesting comes up that people dig a little bit deeper. So what does Schelling do to overcome this? He's deeply inspired by Jakob Böhme, amongst others. And he reverts to a metaphysical concept of the abyss. Urgrund is the word that the Burma uses. You also find it in people like Blake as well, which is interesting. And this is a being. It's like Brahman in Oriental wisdom. It's like it's like a description of the world. The very first sentences of Genesis, there was nothing, there was a void. And it is actually out of this infinite being which has no presence. Also in John's Gospel becomes the word, or logos. Out of this infinite nothingness, which sounds like a contradiction in itself, there is a will within it that wants to manifest itself so that it can know itself. And this is the picture that that Schelling starts to present. And he does something which people familiar with Steiner's work will recognize as this is really interesting. He says, look, this is more or less his development of his thought. So this infinite, this abyss, this original ground of being, which had no presence, it manifested itself so that it could know itself. And then, and then once it has manifested itself in what we see, what is nature, it still, all of its being is not within nature. This is an aspect of itself that is in nature. Let's just call it at a simple level, at the matter level. And then out of this original being, the abyss, the nothingness, it's like a new aspect, a spiritual aspect of that, adds life to matter. So matter itself becomes enlivened. It's the basis. So plants cannot exist without the mineral kingdom, without matter, but matter itself is not capable of producing what happens when life is added to it. And this is exactly the process that Schelling describes, and then he'll go on to say, so like the animal kingdom is a further addition from this original ground, which the spirit has manifested into the animal kingdom. And then finally, the human being is that being which is actually capable of recognizing the spirit that is the creator of that. And this is remarkably similar to what Steiner is describing as the process of science. Even it's like the let's say the more common understanding of what science is. It's a recognition of the spirit in nature, the laws that govern nature, the essence of what matter, what moves matter, what the rules that matter has to obey. So with Schelling, we've got this polarity of nature and spirit, which ties very closely to what we've been seeing here with Steiner. He talks about experience. Experience without spirit is nothing. it's first when spirit is united that you get you get knowledge happening. And but unlike Fichte, which is where I started it, there is a being out of which both of these, the subject and the object, which is what we're trying to transcend to overcome the duality, there is a ground out of which everything comes into being. And in that sense, Schelling is it goes beyond Fichte, is capable of creating a basis out of which subject and object can then differentiate. And pulling this back to my original question, what is this activity? It's like knowledge isn't a passive character that we normally assume. It's an activity. I think one way of perhaps picturing for ourselves what this activity is that this activity that's in the spirit of the original beginnings, the Urgrund, the abyss, the absolute, is actually something that is living in us. And when we start asking questions, why are things like they are, then it is that spirit that is active within us, and we are participating in it. Because one of the things that Steiner is very clear about in this, when he's developing a clarity around what thinking is, it's not that we all create our own individual concepts. What we are doing is the concept of the triangle, for example, which is in Angus, is exactly the same concept as is living in Jeff, as is living in Alexander. We don't have our own private versions of it. This is the spirit world. It's like living through us. And in that sense, it becomes both participatory and absolutely this active nature that something is working in and through me, but wouldn't exist without me, which is it's like, sounds very much like Meister Eckhart. So like, God needs me. It's this idea, but you can begin, or at least this is how I'm reading this particular sentence, that this truly interactive nature between the two. Nature wants to know itself, and it has created human beings so that it can know itself in its spirit, because it can't do that in matter form. What is that? It's a limited form if it just produces matter. It's a less limited form if it just is matter and plants. There's an even less limited form when it's like you include the animal realm, but it's first a human realm where consciousness of the underlying spirit actually becomes conscious. Yes. So nature and spirit is Schelling's fundamental dichotomy there, but I also feel it resonates very strongly with this idea of a spirit producing something so that it can know itself. And I think if people who write, or people who do, any artist, the artist doesn't know what he or she is going to write before it is written. There's a project there, there's a will there to write something, to explore something, but there's a creative process that is happening within that individual. And whether it's on a canvas, or whether it's in music, or whether it's in writing or other forms of art that I haven't mentioned, it's still that essential working out of this abyss, this emptiness in ourselves, which isn't empty, but it gets poured onto the paper, onto the canvas. So I feel a deep resonance between what Schelling's describing, what Steiner's describing, and this final chapter.
I'm strongly struck by this inversion. There's in the scientific side, there is the enjoining participatorily with creation that is ongoing, and in the artistic creation there is an inviting of creation as a whole to participate with us in creating something unique to the soul of the individual who can produce it, and then so align oneself with this generative first principle creation. It's creation. It's true. It's truly creationism. And then I'm with a follow-up of that. I'm also struck by this deepening, already recognized, but deepening experience of the epistemology as an ontology that is both scientific and artistic, synthesized, right? So the object of observation that disappears, or actually the better way to put it, I think, is transparent, is the thinking self that is generated by thinking on the continuum side of that, on the creation side of that. It's just a representation, and we've said this before, but the inversion is it's almost like the inversion becomes present as presence in a way that that when we do art or we do science separately, they are more allusions to each other as opposed to a conjoining of each other. As a first-person experience that's objective is an objective experience of universality.
Let me just respond to Jeff and his question about the artist making or representing the world in his own image. So that's quite unconscious quote I got there from the Bible, but don't know how that crept in. But I think what I meant was to say that the artist uses his own subjective experience and artistic tools to create or to represent reality. And it's also interesting that spectrum can go from being extremely individualistic to, let's say, Dada, for example, the art movement from the 1920s, where even subjectivity or objectivity and subjectivity were turned completely upside down.
Can you say a little bit more about that? I'm not familiar with that.
Dada?
Yeah.
Oh, it was this movement like, I think Matisse. Was Matisse?
Mm-hmm, Matisse, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or was it? No, probably
Was
not.
Ceci et un pipe? Is that the one?
Is that Matisse?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
It might be, yeah.
I'm not
But
sure.
yes, okay. So I'm with you now. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And then Marcel Duchamp, I think, was another artist from that
Mhm.
period
Mhm.
who also made some sort of interesting inversions of what what art could be.
Mm.
So completely contradicting uh, what the art object and what the artist does, what are the sort of goals of art, and just turning it completely upside down. But
This-
in one way, also just going in the complete opposite of representing the world. So it's not a representation of the world anymore. It's a counter representation.
Yeah, I mean, what you get is like it's like the more you come into modern art, people need a description of what they're seeing.
Yeah.
Is one way you could say this is conceptual art, so that the artist is describing it's like what is living in him, her, and this is the way they've decided to represent it, which is very close to it's like what Steiner is saying about what his quotes about Goethe, isn't it? That if an artist has truly succeeded, then it's like that whole spiritual essence that is within the artist during that process of creation is made manifest.
Yeah. And it's true, like modern art the artist becomes a little bit imprisoned in his own subjectivity. And in the conceptual. So I think that would be interesting to discuss, maybe in relationship to anthroposophy, but maybe in another series. What's going on there? But the other, no, I was thinking the other polar is a little bit what happens in Goetheanism, where you are using artistic tools to deepen your understanding and representation of nature or the world. But it's a fine line between subjectivity and objectivity. The subjectivity is present, but you are trying to be as objective as possible in your in the way you're using art and those tools. So even when Goethe is trying to draw plants from memory, so he's using an artistic tool, but he is trying to be as objective as possible. But if you go into to science, and I'm not saying that there's of course there's creativity in science as well. In physics and mathematics, you need to be creative in order to arrive at new laws or new theorems. But the tool itself is very objective. And you're not, you sort of put your subjectivity aside completely. Yeah. I think the tool itself almost doesn't even have room for subjectivity, because you can't
that is the goal of science, isn't it?
You can't do like Marcel Duchamp and say 2 + 2 is 44, because then it would not be science anymore. But in art, it works, or as in contemporary art. So I think that's a big difference. And here we are trying to find a way in which these two activities of the human spirit are supporting each other. which goes back a lot to what you were speaking earlier, how nature creates, or how nature is expanding and unfolding into a self-reflecting being, itself reflecting being.
Yeah.
And in which ways does that become possible? I mean, how can we discover in ourselves the best spiritual activities in which nature or the world or even spirit itself becomes conscious?
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this chapter very much sort of describes, I mean, looking back to the other chapters in which we've been sort of looking into the activity itself in a phenomenological way, and just in detail looking at every aspects of it. Here, in a short way, Steiner introduces, well, here you go.
Yeah.
Here you have these two tools that you can use, and that's how you can reach it. And being in a very early text as well, it's interesting that he is already seeing that this is the path, and that he will eventually help develop all these different initiatives and activities that will lead there in a later future.
Just commenting on the earliness that you talked about there, one of the things, whilst I've been digging a little bit deep into Schelling, is there's a couple of interesting points which it's like even strengthen further that connection of art that you were just describing there, because Steiner was actually already by 19 years of age, 1880, before he wrote this text, was already reading Schelling. And that it is actually as that 19-year-old that he has, so like there's this letter where he's written to his friend and said, I've been up all night, and sort of like something sort of like really clicked for me. And it's whilst he's reading Schelling that happens. And I do, to the best of my knowledge, so the letter doesn't say specifically Schelling is a huge is a huge field. So there's an early phase, there's a middle phase, and there's a late phase of Schelling. So where exactly he was when he was reading, or where in which part of Schelling, early, middle, or late, he was reading, that seems to me still unclear. I haven't found a clear answer. But this type of content indicates that he was already at like that more mature stage where Schelling himself is describing nature as an artist, a self-revealing artist, and that's like the whole of evolution is this process of the world artist, or the logos, or whatever name you, Brahman, whatever name you like to give to it. That might well have already been rooted by the time he was 19, so that he is then able to, was it 1884 he wrote this? Was it 1886? I can't remember. Or not so important, but it postdates. It's like where we know that he's already being reading Schelling, and Schelling has made a very big impact on him, so much so that he writes that. So like what is a fairly well-known letter if you're nerdy about Steiner and Schelling.
This also prefigures the Christ experience that he would have, in my very strong feeling for that that this whole work of his epistemology, and in this chapter, this crucible that is here, right? It's like this is these two things: the individuality coming together with the universality, and vice versa, frankly. And then what you're inviting in, it's a little bit nauseating, actually. At the beginning of our conversation, I was really feeling a bit of nausea because of the humility, the abyss, right? Like, and the faith that it takes at this point as part of an epistemological operation, not as a blind faith. And it's the sort of thing that is invitational to this. I can imagine how then this leads to him having this experience of of being present as a witness at Golgotha, as an eternal event that is just also historically individuated, right? This is something about this time and place that is both very much of the time, but also of a universal quality, and that this is an experience. I think you've mentioned before, Angus, that reading this text, particularly for me, I identify with this text particularly, is a religious experience. So we don't not only do we have science, we have an art. The elephant in the room is religio, or the yoking to the totality. It's a truly religious experience, and there's no wonder, after having read and studied and worked with, as a spiritual practice, philosophy of freedom, that I gained so much confidence as a person. There's a well of something that I could fall back on that is the fountainhead, and that's what he calls it here in this chapter, is the fountainhead. And I would like to say how important this is in our moment, and this is why I think people are converting to Christianity, because they're reaching the logical conclusion. Jordan Hall, I keep bringing in as somebody who reached the end of his brilliance, really, because he's super brilliant. I don't know of another thinker in the landscape that is as a contemporary as brilliant as he is, and found sort of his cool, pale reflection as a Narcissus mythological like experience. And he was paralyzed, and he gave up, in a sense. And then whoosh, comes rushing in his Christ experience, to the degree that it was conscious and also, but very moving in the way he describes it. And also, of all people, we've looked at, Angus and I have looked at the transformational psychology series with Zach Stein and John Vervaeke. And now John is talking about theology as science, as the future, and also about the end of naturalism. Like, and this is what he grounded himself in, like, and would not, and resisted all willingness. Speaking of the continuum of will, against his own better judgment, I would say, and it just has continued to grow in that process. And we see this is a spiritual practice that is developmental of the soul life, such that it brings us to the threshold, and we pull away. So the other thing I wanted to say, I was very moved to write this morning about technology and the scientific endeavor that we are currently entombed in, say, something like that, science that produces utilitarian products and instruments to further extend its knowledge actually is a kind of anti-science in the way Steiner describes science here, if you accept Steiner's description of science, which is to make the material world disappear, right? To see through it into the source, right? And the source is a new agey word, but I'll just stay with that. The source, the generative that brings forth the material world. That's what science is supposed to be doing. But we have a dog and pony show, and we have to make things that are blow up and inject into people and give them pills so that they can reconcile the fact that they are not that they're working against their own nature, that they're not aligned with nature itself. So it also replaces art because it's producing utilitarian objects that have no life in them. I'm not a Luddite here. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have technology, but we've the civilizational layer on top of the deep cultural roots that are the evolutionary process that you described, are taking the place of, are simulating this artistic scientific experience that when synthesized could be inviting in a religious experience.
I do like that you're adding lots of adjectives because to what I was describing as like the abyss or that type of this generative, this will aspect. I know, or and agential. It's so important to, I think, to have all of these words in the mix because abyss can have a certain connotation, but once you start like adding these different words, like the inherent life that is in there, also. It's like it starts to become real, and this is also it's like the artist's role in whichever field she works is so like that inner something actually becomes agential and creates, or generative was another word that you were using there, and it comes with a connection. And I think we can connect this to the difference between representational thinking, dead thinking, versus living thinking. Living thinking has a feeling reality to it that is inherent in there, that is sort of like that. It's stripped of that when we initially start with our abstract thinking. But once we start thinking about thinking, entering more regularly the exceptional state, we begin to realize that these thoughts aren't just thoughts. They're not dead. Life can be brought to them. And not only that, they have a will character, which means that they want to be expressed. They want to be manifested. They want an artist to come along and say, this is what you look like. This is what you sound like.
Yes, and with Steiner's scant but profound description of the 7 life processes, it's only art. It's only the artistic device that can unlock the the Sophia, the deep wisdom in human nature. Otherwise, if we try to approach it from an objective standpoint, we give rise to these mystical experiences that blow us apart. And I think that's another thing is that this is why I'm bringing this in, is that the will is so important here, that the human will link up with that will, the pre-biological life that is generating, and that we are part of participating in generating, that our will, our free will must be engaged. Otherwise, when we have these experiences of the spiritual coming into being, we will experience the abyss without an understanding of the agency, or we might be inviting in beings that are only really interested in the horizontal plane, not the vertical religio, that are really like, Jordan Hall does an incredible job out of his newly found Christian understanding, just completely gives this vertical point of view on the horizontal. And he refers to civilization as that part, is a necessary part of culture, the spiritual, cultural, that Goethe calls the immortal spirit. and that Steiner deals with it when we talked about it in the last time. He deals with this sort of sociology, right, of the as a totality of the humanities brought to bear as a scientific endeavor. But anyway, Hall talks about this, and I thought about this the whole time when we were, because of this fake art and fake science that's going on with technology. This layer that is civilizational, that is grown so exponentially, and it is the dimensions are time and space. It's linear time moving a piece of matter through space directionally in a linear fashion, and that's it. That's all that civilization has to offer. And now it's the technology is exponentializing so fast that we can't keep up with it, right? And so I did a talk with a group of third grade teachers, Waldorf teachers, and they don't understand what's going on in the technological universe. They don't understand that when their child has this and scrolls and chooses, that their psyche and their psycho-spiritual organization is being mapped and manipulated. It's not like watching TV and screen time and the state of hypnosis. That was bad enough, but if we don't have the epistemological framework or the epistemological processes, then we will be fooled to think that civilization is culture. And that's what's happening. Civilization is working back on culture. I'm hoping I'm making this distinction between culture and civilization clear. Because if we don't get the epistemology right now, this is what we're going to keep ending up with. As glorious as it is to experience this, it's also inevitable, in a sense, if we don't bring free will to bear where this crucible exists. And that is necessarily a Christ experience on some level for you. It's a theological experience as a scientific reality.
Alex, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to. That's such big, great exposition Jeff just had. I think, yeah, it is true that we're sort of lost in our vision of the future when it comes to technology and our relationship to the spiritual and to the reality of Christ and how to align ourselves with all of this. And yeah, and how to find that truth within. It's not very easy in the times that we are living. I mean, when there's so much information that is redundant, false, deceiving, that we're constantly, I mean, we're living it as fish in water in our days. Yeah. So, yeah, it's very difficult. And also the tendency to, I mean, I see it in my own life as how I haven't been practicing Goetheanism that much for the past years. Life has taken on other aspects of life that have had to have more attention. So it's easy for me to speak about Goetheanism or open a book and look at some art and identify, recognize, oh, okay, this is true, this is whatever. I can recognize there, but, or even, I mean, even in this series that we've been working with, I feel that, yes, now I'm cultivating
Hmm.
an activity that feels spiritual and free. But I know I could do much more. I mean, I think there could, especially in artistic realm. I feel that there's more that could be done in my personal life, and that is to connect with Jeff's what you were saying about children and schools, how they are being bombarded with tools and techniques and information that are going in the complete opposite direction of what would be spiritual, or the preparation for a spiritual activity that could align the individual with nature, the cosmos, and fully participate in its ongoing evolution. Because, we're doing the complete opposite at the moment as a human species. Most of us are, yeah.
I want to go back to this idea of muteness too, because it was just beautiful the way you said that, the way we mute ourselves, right? And the way we're muted in that way. And the spiritual world needing us to perceive reality and develop mental pictures and imaginations that are congruent with reality, such that the spiritual world can experience that which is manifest. Right? That's what Angus said so beautifully. But it occurs to me just now that the wonderful and terrible reality that the Christ is not mute, because the Christ had a physical incarnation, and the Christ does not need us to perceive reality for the Christ, right? For that we can invite that experience by listening to the Christ. But if we don't, then the judgmental Christ of the Revelations is what will be meted out, say, something like that. And I don't mean to put too much of a sort of idiosyncratic personality on this being, except that we are each imbued as idiosyncratic personalities with the Christ, which is something to come to terms with, right? And that's okay. But thy will be done, right? And we can link up with that will, or the difficulties of our resistance to it become greater, I would say. And it's not to use Christ as a weapon, to sort of scare people into it. It's not the way it works, because it's actually joyful. It's actually deeply, profoundly to participate in loving creation and the goodness of creation and aligning oneself with creation. But this is an uncompromising evolutionary agency, let's say, and the Christ is now driving evolution. Like it or not, call it a belief if you want, but it's a phenomenological, existential, ontological reality.
Going to read a couple of the sentences and just see if you want any further comments. I think we've covered most, but and there might be something else that wants to come out. So a little bit later in the text, he says, "Science and art are the only." Sorry, start again. "Science and art are only the objects upon which man stamps what this vision offers to him. In science, this occurs only in the form of ideas, that is, in the directly mental or spiritual medium. In art, it occurs in objects, sensibly or mentally perceptible." And then a little bit further down, "Here one sees how the true artist must create out of the fountainhead of all existence how he stamps upon his works the inevitable, which in science we seek in the form of ideas, in nature, and in the mind. I think this is this fountainhead in that second one. Here one sees how the true artist must create out of the fountainhead. This we've been dancing around this with lots of like different ways of describing it. And I was thinking back to how key for my personally in my own journey, chapter 13 was to really beginning to see like how this epistemology leads to a true ontology. You can't, it's like to know the ontology, you need an epistemology. But you can't have one without the other. And that became so clear in chapter 13 for me, but also enabled me to link it to so many other traditions that I had read about, like religious traditions, that it was the same spirit, like rendered by different artists or by different peoples. But when you begin to get to the essence, the essential of a phenomena, then it's like its outer trappings, they become transparent. So it doesn't matter like the artistic form that they take on, or so the actual representation, because you feel closer to the essence that it's trying to express here. And then in this final chapter, to make it a deeply personal, I mean, it was already personal in chapter 13, but somehow a little bit more removed, because it's like it's still in the realm of epistemology, it's like in the knowing thinking. But here Steiner is like rooting it so like firmly in a soul, saying, this is you. This is what you are as a human being. You are something that is capable of recognizing the spirit in science, and you are something capable of manifesting the spirit that lives within you as an artist. And to find that it's like so compactly like brought together as a conclusion to this book is special.
I think that's really interesting, Angus, because I was realizing that, you said something about, did you say understanding the spirit through science? Something like that. Or comprehending the spirit, or perceiving the spirit through science?
Perceiving,
perceiving,
yes,
and then manifesting the spirit through art. Because that sort of broadens everything in a way. Because then you go to what you've earlier said, that the word that Steiner uses is Wissenschaft, is not as narrow as science in English, but it is more broad as in knowledge. So it's something that we can only see in our own spirit. We can't manifest outwardly that perception. And then we use art to manifest it. But then art then becomes, it doesn't become painting or sculpture. It becomes everything that we actually do in the world. Even technology has this character of manifesting a knowledge. Even so that we as human beings are not in a position anymore of something, we're not in a position of something original anymore. we've gone beyond some state of original perception, original participation. Yeah, going back to Barfield and Gebser maybe, because we have already acquired knowledge. And because we have already done that, every activity is tainted by that fact that we have perceived something. I mean, even if we have a false perception, our activity will be tainted by that false perception. So and yeah, maybe this has to do with the paradise in the tree of knowledge as well. I know, guessing maybe Jeff wants to say something about that.
Well, in the tree of life, right? So, so that's what we're meant to pick the fruit of in the end. In the end, meaning not the end directionality wise, but as the final participation say, is to live in relationship to the tree of life, to ingest the tree of life, to cultivate the tree of life. Really, what's been said here helps me to understand even more why Waldorf education is one of the great salves and healing educational gestures of our time, because it is a kind of technology, right? But it's a living technology, and the technologies of the future are going to be more like biodynamic technologies, right? If we get this right, there'll be maybe more of an Atlantean kind of technology, right? Working with the living reality in a self-aware way, such that the consequences are as transparent as the generative function that's going on. And so now we can know how to educate children. That artistic endeavor, the artistic process is so, for the teacher is an artist, right? And an artist in life, an artist in a classroom. That's what you were saying. And then actually engaging the children in the plethora, the multiplicity of artistic modalities allows them to hold on to, not just protect them from the world that is trying to strip them away of the yoke of their origin, but actually allows them to have a will inside their little bodies as they grow toward making that connection firmer and stronger, such that it doesn't get severed at a certain point, and when the overwhelm of the outside world rushes in, right? That gift of their maintaining a relationship with the fountainhead is why Steiner said that we need to teach K through 8 through art, right? Such that when they're ready for science, they'll bring an artistic, holistic approach to the scientific endeavor, and won't get lost in the siloed specialties and simulations and instrumentalism and utilitarianism that science has become. And they'll see through the products into the lifeless inorganic technology, and then by the time they get to high school, and needs to be fully realized in that it goes through K through 12, and a lot of parents just dodge out at 8th grade because they don't understand the way the high school then really recapitulates this education, such that they have an epistemological faculty that we are struggling to get. This comes natural to them. Like, my daughter totally understands going into 9th grade next year why she's in this educational environment, and can thank me for it. How many kids in schools around the globe do that and can say that? They're so practical. This is the thing I want to say. Utilitarianism is so impractical. the artistic scientific crucible is so provides for such practicality, and the technologies would look completely different, right? Still there, but they would look completely different.
I want to go back to the Garden of Eden and play with your image there. It's a rich vein to tap. So we've got the fountainhead, we've got God, we've got Brahman or something. This completely unmanifest being, but which is the potentiality of absolutely everything. And I'm going to read a text afterwards too, from his notes, or the preparation to the 1924 edition. So there's God there, and it's like the human beings. That's us, or some of us anyway. We get driven out because we want to know the world. But of course, to know the world, it has to sort of like be like in front of us. It has to be manifest so that we can know it. But we can begin to also ask ourselves the question, okay, so this Lucifer guy, how does this relate to this theory of knowledge? Okay, we've got this metaphysical being, or it could be described as a metaphysical being, or it could be described as a truly ontologically, it's like agential being, which is what we go for. So how does that actually fit into this theory of epistemology? I think one way we could understand it is it's this idea that thinking is subjective. It's Lucifer whispering into our ears, "You, Angus, you're so bloody wonderful. You thought of this. This is all your creation. Ooh, aren't you fantastic?" Whereas what is really required is the humility to realize that, no, what is happening, Angus, is you are slowly reconnecting consciously to that fountainhead. And so this whole journey that idealism, like from Kant onwards, sort of like moves through, can be seen as sort of like as a Luciferic temptation. So like it's all about me, but a failure to recognize the true relationship of thinking to the human being. It's like to our origins. And it's the cherubim that are still keeping us out there. So like, they're the ones who are like making sure we can't get back in. That's why we die, because we don't have access to the tree of life. And perhaps one way we could play with that image is that they are these spiritual forces with a gentle reality. That is when we have fully put aside our subjective delusions, not our personality, but our subjective delusions. Perhaps it is then that the cherubim go, okay, here you go. Yeah, it's perhaps it's like a I've got Swedish derived person on the door. It's like a guard at a door. It's sort of like checking. So like, okay, what this knowledge, is it? Do you recognize that it comes from the source of all being and that it's manifesting in you and it's not your own production? If so, yes, so like I'll give you access for a little while. But then when you fall back into your own subjective delusions, then sort of like you're pushed out again. So it's a little bit the way I might imagine it. And there is actually in the notes, that image had come to me before I'd read this, But when I read this now, it's like it takes on and that what I've mentioned about Schelling and nature and spirit earlier, I find also a deeper level of coherence going on there. So I'll read this. This is from the preface to the 1924 edition. The evolution of the world is then to be understood in such a way that the preceding unspiritual, out of which the spirituality of man later unfolds itself, contains something spiritual above and beyond itself. The later, spiritualized sense perceptibility in which man appears thus arises through the fact that the spirit ancestor of man unites himself with the imperfect, unspiritual forms, and transforming these then appears in sense perceptible form.
Go away. It's funny that there's future and past there, isn't it? Like it's so great that idea that there's a spiritual heritage that is in a continuum, and that we're participating in this forecasting of something unspiritual that then will become the vessel for that spiritual heritage to enter into. Fucking brilliant, man. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
When you say that, Jeff, it reminds me, there's this curious reference in, I think it's in Philosophy of Freedom, where he talks about Baron von Munchausen's like pulling himself up by his own hair. There's the stories, but that's a little bit like what's happening here, isn't it? There's by inviting this activity into us, we are going beyond ourselves. Something that seems so. I
was also thinking about, I mean, this is the activity of that we're always, I mean, that we are continuously invited to create through these two aspects of science and art, considering them in a more broader way. So how we contact, how we perceive and come in touch with something that is more archetypal, more spiritual, through knowledge, and then are invited to put it into will through an art that is a manifestation into the world.
Colored by our personality.
Colored by our personality, yeah. And that's also what's interesting, isn't it? So it's not a template that we are trying to fit into or understand. It's not an equation. It's not, so it doesn't have that fixed or more rigid aspect that normal science has, even if that's an aspect of it, because some things that we deal with are rigid and fixed.
Yeah, it's not a proposition. It's not an argument. It's not a justification. It is a self-evident emergence. And a self-engendered emergence.
Yeah. And I think it's important just to, I mean, looking back to my own life, or these coming in touch with these aspects. One thing is through the exercise of Goetheanism, or the schooling of Goetheanism, I became more and more aware of that activity in myself, outside of the frameworks of Goetheanism. I think that's, if something, that's the important, it's one important thing from this chapter, is that we find in our lives some sort of, maybe some sort of framework, or just it, and it can simply be cultivating the attention to our spiritual life, our thinking life, so that we become aware of that activity in ourselves and can live in and through it, so that it doesn't happen sort of in the shadows of our consciousness. Because then it becomes, when it becomes available, there's room for much more, so much more freedom in our dealings with life.
I would like to play with the word align, because align does have a certain for me, rigidity about it. And what we talked about using different words to describe the abyss, to get that richness that's in there. What other words could we use instead, or to complement align? Because alignment is, it's like an aspect of it, but it doesn't cover, at least for me, it's like what the nature of this relationship is. Have you, first of all, do you share, so like my own sort of like linguistic, it's like sense of ambiguity there, and if so, it's like what other words might you use to describe that alignment?
Mm-hmm. When I was writing this morning, I was using the word harmonic or harmony, because I was thinking about what kind of technologies would we create out of a science that was at once science and art, and an art that was infusing science with creation, right? Not just abstract knowledge of appearances or puzzle pieces or that sort of thing. And that's why we create the technologies we do, because we only have puzzle pieces. So we that's how we put things together mechanistically, even if we say we're beyond mechanism. And so I came, like, we would create technologies that are harmonic with reality. I don't think nature's quite good enough to say, because we're talking about a spiritual continuum that is pre-biological, and it's eternally pre-biological. It's a constant, right? It's there as an intelligence gesturing into the biological. But I couldn't find a word that also dealt with the way in which we're continuing something. Just singing harmony, but not playing jazz, right? We need to have the improvisational aspects such that we're adding to the creation, and harmony doesn't seem to be a word that does that. So I'm open to hearing what one might be, because I can, there's a lot of talk right now of creating technologies that align with, the human well-being or something like that. But we're not going to do it until we can do the epistemology properly. But I agree that alignment is a mechanical kind of word. It's what you do to your front end of your car. So it's not burning rubber and burning oil and, shimmying when you go down the road. So I'm open to it. I mean, perhaps the English language is too limited, and I don't have any other fields of play as far as that goes.
Alex?
Yeah. There's a Zen koan. And the question is, why can't the ox get through the door? The story is that there's an ox, a big ox, that needs to go through a door, or a fence. Call it a fence or something like that. Yeah. And all his big body, everything fits through. So he's sort of getting through this space, but then his tail gets stuck. His little tail gets stuck, and the ox can't go through the door. And the Zen master asks, why can't the ox get through the door? And yeah, I think that's an interesting image. It's interesting because the tail is, well, it's very small. It's something that is quite beyond the reach of the ox. And it's also something that the ox really can't. I mean, I imagine that if an ox turns his head, he won't see his tail. Which comes back to there's something about our human nature that we really aren't conscious about that makes it difficult for us to find our way through and align ourselves. So to use that word. And when it's interesting is that, yeah, then we are using these words that, as you were saying, that has a mechanical aspect to it, or other words that we try to use that represent this hope or feeling or something that is true. But then it seems that we choose these words that are still an aspect of our present mode of consciousness. That is still, I mean, it's still physical, mechanical. I mean, we need to be honest about ourselves that, I mean, we're not our consciousness. Some of us have just, the etheric has revealed itself to us, but we're far from living fully in it. And then I think there's another Buddhist word called Shraddha, which is usually can be translated as faith. And one teacher that I've been following for many years says that the faith is to, yeah, I'm not sure, maybe he uses the word align. But we put our energies into the same energies of the universe that can bring ourselves beyond our state of being. So that requires a leap of faith. It requires it's something that is more rooted in our emotions, in our emotional being than in our intellectual being. And we can see intellectually that, if I align this with this, it will probably lead me to something. But there will always be some sort of resistance, maybe in ourselves, because we're not fully conscious, awake to what it is we are trying to align. So we need to find some sort of other aspect in ourselves that allows us to make that leap.
I think I've got a word that you've used before, Alexander. I remember, I can't remember, it might have been the third chapter we did. I'll come to that in a second, but I just want to trace through the thoughts. It's wonderful listening to both of you reflect, because as I listened to Jeff talking about harmony, it was sort of like, yeah, that's already a lot better. And that's like, that already took me to a more etheric, it's like in resonance with. And then because of the weirdness of my thinking, it's okay, what's that in the astral realm? Well, it's sympathy, isn't it? It's and sympathy for me also captures an aspect of the reality of the relationship that we need to cultivate towards this being, this source of everything. It treat it as something that is real, hard to know, but using a Fichtean term, positing in myself the reality that it exists, and then letting itself sort of like show how it exists. I connect that deeply with what you were saying there about faith, Alexander, that faith, love, what other jealousy, hate, sympathy, all of these inner experiences that we have are agential. People, so like for the average sciences, they're epiphenomena, but they are the basis of our soul life. So we don't do anything unless we are emotionally moved to do it, whether it's like towards or away from. So these are real agential qualities. I suppose Leibniz would talk about monads, but they are realities. And when we really wake up, when we move away from like a science that is based in sort of like what is visible, and wake up to our own inner lives, the reality of thinking, the reality of feeling, the reality of the will, they really begin to clarify themselves, so like how they are distinct. I'm thinking about like the three kings in the Goethean fairy tale there that needed to be. So as you two were talking about those words, and Alex was talking, I was thinking, so I want sympathy, but I want a sympathy that is acting. And then I came to Alexander's word, dancing. Dancing is what it is, isn't it? Dancing with Christ. It's this free relationship. You're like, sometimes you lead, sometimes he leads. Give and take. There's sympathy. There's joy there. Yeah, so I think I'm going to try and do a dance more often than a line, and especially when I'm talking about these type of questions.
I really got the picture while you were talking about these soul qualities as beings, really, or the gestures of beings that are influential in our soul configuration, our soul substance. Really, I don't mean it as substance, ontology substance, but I mean real of meaty meaning that could be morphologically configured to enjoin with the continuum of creation as it is constantly generating, something like that. I don't think there's a single word that says that. Maybe there's a German word and it's like 4 pages long. but I don't think there's a single word that says I love that you brought in the three kings, because the opposite of alignment is there with the fourth king, who's muddled. Right? That refers to civilization, right? That is lording over us as the king, that is ruling us and disaligning us or deharmonizing us or fragmenting us. So whatever the word is, it's the opposite of fragmentation. It has to do with synthesis and metamorphosis and morphological consistency with the continuum. All of these words, but it's so many damn words. I want one. I want one that says it. Yeah, that says it. And maybe it's empathy. The conjoining the cohering in harmony of the constellation of these gestural beings in our soul that we don't necessarily have free reign over, like the muddled king. Maybe the clarity is in that, in the alignment. God, I had to say the word. And maybe the clarity is in the cohering constellation of those kings, the three kings, is the constellating sort of thing, like this. Yeah, I don't know. It's fun to try, though. I think I'm so glad you asked that question.
Okay, we've been going for an hour and a half. What I'd like to do is end up with the final sentence from the preface to the 1924 edition, and just see if it sparks any last comments. If not, then I think it serves as a perfect end to this whole series that we've worked through together. So, concluding, as I look at it again today, remember this is 40 years, more than 40 years after he wrote it. As I look at it again today, it also appears to me to be the epistemological foundation and justification for everything I said and published later. It speaks of the essential being of knowing activity that opens the way from the sense-perceptible world into the spiritual one. Shall I press the
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. In the man's own words.